Once again, good morning, and let's continue our conference. We have heard about the challenges of the banking sector and the challenges that banking sector is facing. Now it is time to look at the future of Slovak industry and businesses. Slovak manufacturing businesses form a substantial part of the country's GDP. The industrial sector faces nowadays also multiple challenges. Shock created by the Russian aggression in Ukraine has led to growing energy costs and inflationary pressure, with further endangered of the survival of some of the companies here in Slovakia. Yet the climate-related risks, both physical and transition-related, will remain part of the doing business in Europe and in Slovakia. So let's discuss the future of Slovak industry with our host of the next panel, Mrs. Linda Zajelina, the CEO and founder of International Sustainable Finance Center. Good morning. Please take your seat as the first one, and allow me to introduce also the participants of the next discussion. Oliver Grunberg, the CEO of Volkswagen Slovakia. Good morning. Martin Kuruc, the country CEO of Tesco. Marek Senkovic, the CEO of Slovnaft. And finally, Michal Pinter, the Director for Relations with the Slovak government and the EU at US Steel Košice. All the names are on the right position, and the host of the panel discussion too, so we can start. Take it away.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody back. We are very pleased to see such a good turnout for the very first Climate Risk and Sustainability Conference in Bratislava. So the topic, we have of course heard a lot of things from the previous panel which touch upon also on this one, because we started with the banking sector, so the financial lifeblood of the economy, and now we finally turn and look at what is actually happening under different sectors. So what does the industry struggles with, what we need to do, what are the challenges, and very importantly, what are the potential solutions. We will not cover too much theory because we think that the main interesting elements lie in practice. So that will be our focus today. So we call it Sustainability in Business and Practice. And actually, let me start with one of the sectors that is very close to everyone's heart. Food and agriculture is extremely important for all of us. We all go and buy our food. We all want to be healthy and wealthy, and part of that is, of course, consumption. So retail sectors are one of the very interesting parts of the economy that will be probably very much affected both by physical and transition risks. So let me start with Mr. Martin Kuruc, who is the CEO of Tesco. So the retail sector has been one of the most affected ones by a variety of changes, no food waste, etc., etc. So a variety of different things. So with your very complex supply chains and operations, what have been the main challenges you faced? And have they had a sustainability angle?
Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation. Really appreciate that food and retail can be part of these discussions on sustainability, partially because it's quite likely that in a couple of years, food production or food as a sector will be one of the largest contributors to climate change. But taking the challenges first, in the last couple of years, no surprisingly, I would start with saying that the last couple of years have been really difficult for retail and for us. Started with food security, the topic which was almost forgotten, but brought back to the surface and to the top of the agenda with the first pandemic wave. It put enormous pressure on all the supply chains, but also on the businesses, on colleagues working in retail, and really brought the food security back on the agenda. It was a lot about keeping our colleagues safe, as well as providing food for everyone, especially the first COVID wave. But it wasn't only about food, but also about non-food, especially in those categories or segments where the production is predominantly Asia. So you can imagine that the broken supply chains, the increasing freight cost, shortage of the containers, increase of course, slower routes, as well as the lately the COVID closures or restrictions in the Chinese ports meant a massive disruption. This year, or last year actually, we started to face a massive inflationary pressures, just like everyone else, I think. But in our sector, it was the combination of the commodities, energies, and of course the food prices is something what is close to everyone and what everyone notices. So the pressure was unprecedented on the supply chain as well as on the retail businesses. We tried to do everything what we could to protect our customers and pass through less and later of the inflation, working and collaborating with suppliers, which where our connections and our negotiations were far more frequent than we've been used to in the past, as well as looking for our internal reserves or our internal possibilities to decrease costs and not to pass the inflation into for our customers. So we did launch some special programs like club card prices, low price guarantee, cost of living campaign. But I think the main challenge which we are going to talk about today is the long-term challenge, and that's the climate change, that's the sustainability. And I need to say, it is the far the biggest one, which is in front of us. We at least consider it this way, and talking about it now is even more important because the businesses are more busy with really running businesses, absorbing costs, trying to serve the customer best in the massively inflationary environment, but the climate change doesn't go away. Tesco was one of the first businesses back in 2009 who set up the zero carbon target, first businesses in the world, and ever since we've been even more ambitious. So now we've got the clear target being net zero in our own operations by 2035, and then net zero in the whole supply chain by 2050. That's because actually 90% of the carbon emissions within the full supply chain is produced by production and consumption of the things we sell. Therefore, we are looking at it almost end to end. And we did a lot, but I think we will hopefully be able to talk about it later.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up the fact that actually where the effect is hidden is often the supply chain. So, and it's one of the most complicated things to decarbonize. But it's also very interesting setting that target 2050, so that actually focuses your mind, and I think backcasting does help. And while we will have, I think going forward, we will have to deal with a lot of different shocks, inflation going up and down, I think at the same time we need to keep the fundamentals in mind, which is the physical risk will probably increase unless we do something. Let me now turn to Mr. Marek Rzękowicz, who's the CEO of Slovnaft, so a very, very important actor in the ecosystem of Slovakia. And you also sit on, I believe, the management committee of the MOL Group, which is a very interesting role to have at this point in time. So you have the company has a long story in history in Slovakia. So what are the key priorities for you for this year and potentially next year, since we know that the geopolitics and economic situation is changing? And how are you trying to address the conversation around decarbonization?
Yeah, thank you and good morning, and having opportunity to be here. We have many priorities, but I would name just 5 of them. First is probably a very simple one, to keep operational availability of all our assets on very high level, because everybody is expecting that we will be providing fuels to the region every day, every minute, all the year, similarly like other refineries. So very complicated task. Assets are very old in the whole Europe, 70, 80-year heritage, million kilometers of pipeline length, thousands of tanks, compressors, complicated role to keep the operation alive so that the customer, households, nobody in the country or region, so that everybody is secure in this point of view. So that's number one. Second one, that comes as a result of the war or current situation, we have to diversify, we have to decouple from the Eastern energy source. So therefore we have quite a robust crude diversity program that will last in this country roughly 3 to 4 years, 12-point program which will help Slovak and also other refineries in the group to be able to completely process different type of crudes within next 3 to 4 years, so that the country is, let's say, less exposed to the supply shock coming from the Russia. Third one is related with the decarbonization. Whether we want or not, we have to decarbonize to reduce our carbon footprint. By the way, Slovak is one of the biggest emitter here in the country, maybe the second one or the third one, I don't know. 2 million tons of CO2 is produced by our plants, but maybe more interesting, more focus should be made, and it will be made for sure by car industry, that the carbon footprint from the fuels is 12 million tons. So the scope 3 carbon footprint reduction must be, and then the whole planet will be much cleaner. Fourth one project or group of projects is related with the transformation, because sooner or later fossil fuels will disappear from the market or will completely shrink, and therefore we have a set of projects that are focused how to divert from our fuel producing to more chemical producing. We have already this pillar in our group, but it will be strengthened. But beside this, we have also other projects in our pipeline, for instance, how to treat with the waste, utilization of the waste, not only for energy production, but also how to make from waste, for instance, chemicals. Very expensive, but possible. But for that, of course, we need some sort of support and acceptance of the local community, the local government, that the waste is a precious feedstock. This project can bring money. Decarbonization itself will bring no money in reality, and we are, and not only we, but all companies are here to produce money and dividends for the investors in order to create the wealth for the broader society. So therefore we have to invest also in this type of project that will enable us to be here also in 30 years. And last point is, let's say, more soft and related with the HR. We see that there is, let's say, or we want to keep and retain skilled people in chemical industry in Slovakia and to attract new generation. Why it is important? Because many people are reading newspapers or in mass media that this type of industry should disappear from Europe, or that type of industry, or I don't know, aluminum. And if young students see this, they do not want to study it. But we need these engineers in the future. Not only we, but the whole Europe. If we want to be independent and wealthy and not dependent on China or US and Africa, I don't know, in the future, we simply have to have here engineers that will keep current operations alive, and then new businesses, new projects that will be here as a new normal in 2040 or 2050. That's our priority.
Thank you, Mr. Stankovic. I think that's a very interesting snapshot of very concrete step-by-step planning, and also envisaging what actually you can look like in 70 years down the line. And I agree with you that it's very important to talk about that transition, because, well, it's where the biggest impact lies, is actually, as we heard from the previous panel as well, it's not the dichotomy, it's actually how do we do a socially inclusive, employment-friendly transition, which I think is going to be the main challenge that we need to solve. Which brings me to another sector that is very interrelated between chemicals and oil, and then we will continue later also with steel. So we have Mr. Oliver Grunberg next to me, who is the CEO of Volkswagen Slovakia and chairman of the board of management and also the member of the board of management for production. And we all know that for the Slovak economy, automotive industry is quite a big sector. It is also similarly important to Czech Republic. And it would be really interesting to hear from you, how do you see the future of the automotive sector in these countries, and how is it evolving? And if we are talking about some sort of a greener business model for automotive, how can we future-proof this model, knowing what we know now, that there is probably going to be more regulation, more pressure to show action on climate change? And what are the main challenges to future-proof or to create this greener model? So over to you, please, Mr. Grunberg.
Okay. Yeah, first, good morning. Thanks for the invitation. When you talk about greener business models within automotive, it always pops to my mind that basically all OEMs in Slovakia could step over from production to car hailing and ride sharing and done, right? The problem is just only that we would all be bankrupt within 2 years, because not a single of these green business model is earning money, and that's why we don't do it. Yeah, easy as that. If you are in manufacturing, in production, yes, you need energy. Everything that you physically produce, and nobody of you will buy a virtual car if you physically want to get from A to B. To produce something physical, you need energies. And some of the energy produced and some of the energy you require is coming from dirty sources. Let's be honest, we are buying green electricity wherever we can, but not all processes are running on electricity. So as long as you're coming away from electricity, you're facing problems, because sooner or later you're talking about combustion processes, and then I'm just talking about the production of the cars, and of course, as you do, we're talking about the end-to-end part. So basically, the product needs to be sustainable, the logistical chain, our sub-suppliers, sub-suppliers, and even the steel that we get from somewhere needs to be sustainable. And later on, of course, the life cycle of the car needs to be sustainable, besides the production that we are responsible for ourselves. So as soon as you come from non-green electricity, which you are able to create very easily in a sustainable form, you just need to promote this quite heavily. But as soon as you need to change from combustion processes to other processes, then you are getting into a business that you are in, because you need a lot of money. And if you bear in mind that you carry responsibility as Group Volkswagen for 650,000 employees worldwide, and you want from one day to another change your factories from what they do at the moment, produce in a, let's say, average sustainable way, I would say. We are not starting at zero, but there is a long way to go to be at full zero. And basically deciding in 5 years we want to be at net zero, you are bankrupt again, because all of you will probably lend us even the money, but later on our stocks will fall down very quickly due to the fact that our investment rate is going somewhere else where we don't want it. And just by getting sustainable, not one single product is sold. This happens step by step. In Norway, for example, in 3 years' time, we will not be able to sell any combustion engine cars anymore. And not necessarily due to regulations, but due to awareness. People just don't want it anymore. And that's why we basically, within 3 years' time, are stopping to sell combustion engine propelled cars in Norway. And we are just lucky enough to have other propelled cars, basically electric cars. If you wouldn't have, you would basically disappear from the market. And that is what sooner or later will happen if you're not, let's say, adopting to the speed of sustainability, you will just disappear from the market. If you, on the other hand, leap too far, you will die in beauty. That is not what you want as well. So you need to find the balance of basically being quick enough, being always a step ahead, having the product that you need for the next 3 to 5 years, and driving the speed of sustainability that you need to go to, let's say, to fulfill your responsibilities that you have, let's say, for your children and for the society.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's a very strong point that currently the market setup doesn't really reward massive sustainability initiatives for a lot of businesses. We've heard that from several sectors where the main issue is that we would love to. However, currently my financial backers are saying, why don't you just keep your profitability margins where they are, because it's very important. There's a lot of uncertainty, so it might be a bit too risky. I would love to, before we actually analyze a bit deeper why that is and what could help change this status quo, because I think if we're all talking about how we are running out of the carbon budget, we're creating bigger climate risks, well, what is it that could be done better by certain actors to actually create a better environment for industry to transition? So that's going to be the second part. Before I turn to Mr. Michal Pinter, who is the Director for Relations with the Slovak government and the EU from US Steel Košice, I just wanted to remind that we still have the Slido running, so if you put 07-2023, you can add your questions. We already have a few, so we'll try to integrate them as we go on. But Mr. Pinter, so we've heard now from the automotive sector. It would be very interesting to hear also from the steel production. I'm a frequent visitor of Brussels, and I've sat in on some very interesting conversations about steel, cement, and chemical production and all the massive challenges that we have around that, and especially with the pressures from other locations such as US and China. So what are the particular pressures that your sector is facing in Slovakia and I guess wider Europe, since we are in the EU? And since your sector is particularly similar to chemicals and also automotive, there is a high level of energy that you use. It's energy intensive. So are there any changes in the energy mix and energy policy that you'd like to see when it comes to the Slovak Republic? Please.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. First of all, there are many pressures. I don't want to repeat what the other speakers already said. We are facing now, especially after the start of the war in Ukraine. Steel industry, as I always say, it's part of the solution. It's not an enemy. We are not only about chimneys, pipe, and a lot of CO2. We admit that we are one of the biggest polluters, but at the same time, I have to add that the European steel industry, when you look at the figures and numbers, is already the most advanced in terms of environmental sustainability or climate performance. We've been able to cut our energy use and CO2 emissions since the 60s by half, and we, of course, can do more. We can contribute to the minus 55% target by 2030, and if appropriate technologies are developed, which are not available right now, we can also try to be completely climate neutral by 2050. However, and that was your question, there is a lot of pressures, there is a lot of challenges and but. First of all, in this very difficult geopolitical situation, we are very much challenged by the loss of competitiveness in Europe. Global competitors, not only at this moment, but also before, they are not facing anything close to the environmental standards and climate constraints which are here for the EU steel makers. And also, and that is important to highlight, they also don't bear, at least not at this time, the same transition costs. At the same time, Europe is a very open market. we face a lot of imports, trade balance of both finished products and semi-finished products in our sectors with third countries outside of the EU is negative for the last 5 years. And this creates a situation with a persistent high import penetration from a historical point of view, and this is coming at a time where we were facing weak demand. 2021 was a big difference, but the COVID era and the let's call it war or post-war era, it's a really big demand. At this time, and I believe this was not discussed by the speakers before me, as you know, one of the biggest challenges is IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, coming from the US, which I personally, not because I'm coming from American company, but because I was looking at it, I found it as a, trying to use diplomatic word, as a protectionist package of policies. But compared to the EU, it's really centered at the competitiveness of the US businesses. It's really centered at subsidies, direct subsidies, grants, loans to increase the competitiveness of US industries, which is of course going to create problem to us. At the same time, here in EU, we claim to have policies and measures, but many times it's more about promises than about real outcome. When there is something in place, usually we are facing distortions which are produced from the policies as they are applied. Another challenge ahead of us, of course, and this was mentioned, I don't need to speak more about this, is energy costs. The whole decarbonization ahead of us, and I will speak about it later on, is about electrification. So with the current prices of electricity and of gas, it was difficult before to model any transition, but now it's, unless something really changes, it's almost impossible. And as I said at the beginning, we believe that we can deliver, but with this picture, it's very difficult. If you look also at the administrative and regulatory burdens of EU businesses, these are also much higher than in the foreign countries. In case of state aid, because we many times are challenged by media or public that there is a lot of state aid available, but this is not my statistics, but when the EU was now consulting the member states about Inflation Reduction Act and possible measures, Mrs. Verstager, responsible for the single market, produced a table which was showing, and I was shocked to see that when you look at the state aid which was made available to businesses in Europe since pandemic, 53% of state aid in EU was delivered in Germany, 24% in France, and number 3 it's Italy with 3%. And when you look at Italy in terms of industrial production, not per capita, but in nominal terms, it's the second most industrialized country in the EU. So when you count those 3, what was left for the others, for the smaller countries? Last but not least, because you asked about the challenges and pressures, there is ETS and there is CBAM. CBAM, which was meant to be a measure to help businesses to overcome the situation ahead of us. Unfortunately, in a way, as it was structured by the Commission, we don't think that it would be so helpful. As you know, the steel industry was really highlighting from the very beginning that we do need to keep the free allocation to carbon leakage exposed industries up until the transition, at least its first part is over, meaning by 2030. This is not the case in the compromise decision which is now being discussed in the trilogue. Also, there are severe risks concerning circumvention issues in regard to CBAM. You know, if you look at China, China is exporting 5% of steel into EU. It won't be any problem for them to export the clean steel into EU and basically to export the dirty steel to the other parts in order to avoid the CBAM fees and come to the European market. Last but not least, I should have started with it, but we are going to face enormous amounts of investments needed for decarbonization. You know, I'm representing a company which is the biggest polluter in Slovakia with about 9 million tons of CO2. Our plans are to switch. We are operating right now 3 blast furnaces. For those of you who don't know, this is the primary way of making steel, which is here for 100 years. The only way how to decarbonize effectively by 2030 is to electrify, as I already said. So we decided basically to switch from 3 BOFs to 2 electric arc furnaces, and we are keeping, or the plan is to keep 1 blast oxygen furnace. Not that we don't want to decarbonize, and the technical possibilities for decarbonization of the primary way of steel making is limited. But the reason why we are keeping, or we want to keep one of the BOFs in place is because technically you cannot produce all kinds of steel with electric arc furnaces. Looking at my colleague from Tesco, for the food industry, we produce a lot of steel for food packaging, and that is impossible with the current EAFs. So this is the reason why we are keeping them. But of course, these investments are coming now at a situation where, as I already mentioned, we will also face, in addition to high capex, we will face high opex to operate the new technologies, which will be consuming a lot of electricity, and I can elaborate on that later on. So the last thing I should mention, because for us it's really a big challenge, is also the availability of scrap. Now 60% of steel produced in the EU, it's coming from the primary way, 40% it's coming from EAFs, but when you look at the mix, about 57% of the steel produced in the EU needs scrap. And whether scrap will be available or not, and how we will again develop the legislation, because a lot of scrap is being, which is valuable material for the sustainability. From the sustainability point of view, a lot of scrap is being exported out of the EU. So these are more or less the challenges we face. And
thank you. We actually published a report. We have an ongoing project, which I think is probably one of the only ones on decarbonizing hard-to-abate industries, which is steel, chemicals, and cement. And that was one of the findings, the fact that we actually export scrap, and then we have to do primary sourcing. So it's a...
Now it will be okay to export scrap to OECD countries and not to non-OECD countries, which nobody understands why there is this distinction. But that's the rules, how they are being developed at the moment. So,
yeah, well, I think it's an interesting point also about the leveling playing field globally. So how are we going to actually figure out the different competition issues? I think bringing up CBAM, so for those who are not very well versed in industry, CBAM stands for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is a plan to actually add, you could say, hidden tariffs. Some call it hidden tariffs, but it is essentially if you are importing metals or other things so that actually the emissions are accounted for, so you don't have carbon leakage across different countries. So it's a very important part of the Brussels discussions, and I think, again, devil lies in the detail there, and we will still see whether the World Trade Organization actually believes that that is compatible with WTO rules. And EU ETS is the European emissions trading system, which currently gives industry heavy polluters free allowances, which they now want to start removing, etc., to increasing further pressure for lowering emissions. So for those, because I mean, I love acronyms, they save time, but sometimes we have to remember that there's many, many of them. Let me just now do a second round. We also have some audience questions, which I will tackle in a few minutes, but just so you already start thinking about it, is there will be a question about CBAM, whether that will be a positive or negative effect on the competitiveness of US steel, Košice, and steel production in general. And also it's a few questions about how do we deal with supply chain, so what pressures can we apply on our suppliers. But first let me turn back to Mr. Marek Sinkovic. So we've now heard several mentions of the fact that this is all expensive, which is true, and how you're going to pass on the costs or how we're going to pay for it is extremely important, both from socio-economic point of view of passing on costs, but also in terms of fiscal policy and expenditures. So my question is, from your point of view, do you believe that currently there is enough money for financing decarbonization? Is the money on good terms? Do you also get money for innovation? Because from our findings, there was a big lack of decent funding for pilot projects and demonstration effect. And what would be the enablers or changes that you would like to see that would actually make your life easier?
Before coming to money, it is good that there are a lot of ideas how to decarbonize world. And that's good news, because it is better to have ideas than no ideas. I have no doubt that the industry, regardless of any type of industry, will find solution how to reduce their own carbon footprint in production or in products. What I have a little more concern is when the political elites wants to drive and to direct you what to do. Because usually this direction from the political elites brings higher costs than necessary. Just 3 small examples. For instance, even with existing technologies, the global world or the world could save a bunch of CO2. For instance, in Europe, there is the same amount of cars on the roads than in US. In Europe, we have 500 million people, including UK, I think. In US, 330 million people. Oil consumption in Europe is 12 million barrels per day. In US, 20 million barrels per day. So, okay, it is larger continent. I can take this. But so, with existing car fleet, if existing car fleet of Europe would be used in US, we could save millions of barrels of oil, and also saved on CO2. Or on oceans and seas, there are moving 100,000 of ships, different size. And these ships are emitting 2 times more emissions than 500 million of cars in the world. 2 times more than in Europe itself. So it is, in my view, easier and cheaper to eliminate these 100,000 ships from the seas than to eliminate 500 million cars or to electrify them, etc. And in case of us as an industry, I can show you example. We are, as a chemical company like fertilizers and chemical refiners, are forced to use for production of hydrogen to use electrolyzers. Electrolyzers are very expensive, and it needs also a lot of electricity. But we have also electrification program here in Slovnaft, where with relatively simple investment, when we will exchange powering of some motors that are now powered by the steam, and these motors will be changed for electric motors. This change, we can save 10 times more CO2 at the same investment costs, like investing into electrolyzers. But we are forced to invest into electrolyzers. So somewhere this extra cost must be passed to customers, or at the expense of our profitability, or at the expense of EU funds, so our budget. So I think that we as the global society should use existing technologies if possible, and then to go to the new technologies. In terms of money, less bureaucracy, less regulation, as like Michal said, it is welcomed. Second point, now, and I have to admit, energy industries have some money. They earned a lot of money last year, and we want that this money stays in the industry. Similarly, like we, cement makers, steel makers, car makers, are in front of big transformational leap, and we need to have money for that. Not only we, but the households expect from us that there will be no blackouts, that there will be no freezing temperatures in their households. For that, we as the Europe have to have more LNG ports, more pipelines, more transmission cables network, even more steel makers, so that we are not dependent on China, because these bring the safety to the household. But for that, you need billions and billions of investment. And last point is, again, maybe softer one. I would welcome if from the highest political levels there is clear, loud voice that the industry of any type is welcomed in Europe, regardless whether it's aluminium, steel, car, chemical, even mining. It is necessary for batteries, because you mentioned it, that in Slovakia, industry employs 700,000 people. It is the biggest employer in this country. But it is not only because of the employment. If we will push out the industry from the Europe, we will be dependent. We will not be free. And freedom is now precious value. So that's my...
Thank you. I think that's a powerful message, the fact that if we're going to do strategic autonomy, we need to also have a think about what are the critical elements that we need in the economy to enable that. So switching again to you, Mr. Kuruc, and to Tesco Slovakia. So we have now heard of several examples of how you can try and drive down the emissions. It's not a simple task, but do you have any success stories before we depress all of the audience with it's all just challenges and it's very difficult? And so do you actually have any positive examples you can tell us about? And yeah, your belief in does it work? Do we start with small is beautiful and then grow it into something bigger? Yeah. And also would be very interesting to hear in terms of the investment needed to potentially decarbonize certain supply chains. Is there anything more that, for example, governments can do? Because we have been exploring this potential types of contracts and agreements where there are certain types of guarantee that is linked to a bank that then provides a loan to an SME because they have a contract for 20 years with a big purchaser. So are there any kind of things that you would like to see changing from these kind of complex setups?
Do have some success stories, so hopefully we'll won't get depressed from the topic. As I said, I mean, not a known fact, or not many people recognize it, but very likely by 2030, food as a sector will be the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, as the industry, as the transport, energy decarbonize. On top of it, 40% of the food which is produced worldwide is not consumed, so it's thrown away. And of course, the food, the production of food also significantly negatively impacts biodiversity. So for us, almost like a flagship sustainability thing for us as a company is exactly the food waste, and that's what we started to tackle in the almost first phase. I'll touch emissions later, but and definitely food waste. 40% of the food is thrown away, responsible for 10% of the global gas emissions, which by itself is a shocking thing. So we produce 10% of the global emissions for nothing almost. So we started as the first business in the Central Europe. We started to measure and publish our food waste data back in 2017, encouraged the others, but not many followed us, to be honest, in terms of our competitors in the industry. Only in 2 years' time, until 2019, we halved the food waste within our operations. So we fulfilled the UN SDG target 12.3, halving the food waste by 2030, 11 years in advance before the deadline. So things can be done. Ever since the 2017, we reduced our food waste by 69% as Tesco Slovakia, and 91% of the food, which is still people can consume, so it's still edible, we now donate, so it's not thrown away. Our final ultimate goal is go to zero. Therefore, we've got the program of every single store donating the food on a daily basis. We have been able to through that, ever since the 2017, we've been able to save 29,000 tons of emissions, which compared to what the big ones produce is a peanut. But for us, it's a big achievement. And also, it's also the equivalent. What we donated is equivalent of 21 million portions of meal. Just for imagination, every single day we donate roughly 5 tons of food across Slovakia, which is the equivalent of 12,000 meals every single day. So this is something what's almost the proof that the things can work and we can move quickly. Of course, only relatively small % of the food waste is produced within retail operations. The majority, about 50%, is the production or farming, manufacturing, and then household. So what we now, what's our next stage, apart from get to zero in terms of edible food, is how to engage our suppliers. And I'm proud to say that we've got now 16 of our big food suppliers within Central Europe who with us measure and publish the data on food waste this year, which is again a good step forward. And of course we do what we can do towards and we'll be doing towards educating our customers how to waste less food in households, because that's a big part of the food waste. Apart from the food waste, of course, we need to take the whole planet issue, or whole sustainability issue. So we talk about the emissions. What we did so far was that we took all our stores and distribution centers are run by renewable energy. We did look at the efficiency of our refrigeration massively through reducing the refrigeration, switching the gas in the refrigeration, putting doors, and other ways how to save energy in refrigeration. We installed all LED lighting in all our stores, and the third big bucket is the transport, where we looked at how to make our fleet more efficient. And the three are actually still at the top of our agenda, because the most of the emissions which we produce in our operations going through refrigeration, so therefore the refrigeration efficiency through heating, a good trial which we started to do, work on last year, and hopefully we'll be able to roll out from this year onwards are the air pumps, which are heating or cooling our stores, and therefore we can be almost fully independent from the fossil fuels. And then the transport, how to get our fleet more efficient. To your last point around how to finance this all, we think there is a massive opportunity in every single business. We almost take this challenge as a principal challenge for our P&L, and not doing anything means getting cost later into the business, whether it's going through, whether it's going to be the taxes or fines, or whether it's going to be the scarcity of sourcing of food because of drought, because of flood, so more expensive sourcing, etc. So, I mean, first of all, we look at this, but going into the larger supply chain, like end-to-end supply chain, which I already mentioned, it will be definitely important, especially for manufacturers, farmers, food processing industry, to be able to get to money which would be available and for reasonable price.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting snapshot of what I would call future risk management, right? Where the costs might come, and then you try and figure out which are the most doable first steps. I mean, it's also interesting that you touched upon infrastructure, because when you talk about facilities, production, etc., well, to be able to have facilities that operate on heat pumps and use green energy, and you actually mentioned something about green fleets as well, or decarbonized fleets. Well, for that you need energy charging infrastructure, etc., which then ties also to one of our other colleagues who mentioned that we need just that grid upgrade if you really want to have really great stable energy. So let me actually quickly turn back to you, Mr. Grönberg, because I think relatively quickly. So currently in Slovakia, so you mentioned Norway, and I used to work in Norway for years, and I still remember the early days of, I got an EV, I'm better than you, conversations around dinner tables, and it's actually very eerie now in Oslo because there's very little noise, because it's so very deep market penetration, which actually was enabled by rather big, bold action on the governmental side. It didn't happen from nowhere. It did have also a subsidy angle to it. So that brings me actually to a question where you see the future of automotive here in Slovak own market. Do you believe that there's more to be done about, do we need better infrastructure? Do we need better financing of people who want to switch to an electric car? And actually one of the audience members, and I think this is a topic that I've had family discussions around, what is greener? Is an EV really that green? Because, you know, it's a complicated supply chain, critical minerals, other issues. So is that the future? And I think actually with your opening remark, you touched upon if we all need green mobility, and is actually green cars a green mobility, etc. So there's a lot of discussions going on about what the future of European mobility will look like. But I think let's start at home, and it would be wonderful to hear how you see what are the kind of most pressing needs that would enable potentially greater uptake of electric vehicles across the region, maybe in Slovakia, maybe also in Czech Republic, etc. And what could actually help that happen? And are there already any kind of signs of change or positive examples that can be used? Because I believe that Volkswagen operates in many different countries.
Well, first perhaps to answer the question that you had on your dinner table. Running an electric car in Poland definitely is not clean, because if the energy that you produce is coming to 80% from coal power plants, then you don't do anything to get your planet greener, right? Considering that, on the other hand, you have to do really compliments towards Slovakia having a very precise and very clear plan how to get the grid energy towards sustainability, yes, with atomic power, and one can discuss about that, but a lot of that with water power and other sustainable sources. So basically, running electric cars in Slovakia, even by now and even by far more in 5 to 10 years, in our point of view, is a good thing to do. Even less do we understand the discussion of Slovak government to go to promote hydrogen-driven cars, for example, needing 3 times more energy to go from A to B, even if you have sustainable energy, but we still don't have enough of it. So if you would have sustainable energy as as much as you want, and you would have it in overflow for wherever you want to get it. Yes, you can discuss anything like electric cars or hydrogen cars or even synthetic fuels, but as long as, let's say, sustainable energy is something which is short, you would need to take the most, the cleverest way to use it, and that is electric cars at the moment. That's why we, from a Group Volkswagen point of view and from our perspective, we basically, yes, you can discuss technology open transport, and there might be fields of transport where electric-driven mobiles are not the ones that you need, but for cars, we are fully committed that electric cars is the way to go. So that's basically the statement from our side. And well, there are things that you should do, and but what is even more important is what you shouldn't do. And that brings me, for example, to a discussion that currently happens in Brussels that you mentioned it, for example. The Chinese automotive business, and we are in a global business, we cannot look at Slovakia, which is a really tiny market compared on a worldwide scale, not even Europe, we can look at a closed market. That the Chinese OEMs are really hardly getting into sleep because they're that much laughing at us, as we are increasing the regulations on combustion engines on EU7, by that binding hundreds and thousands of highly qualified developers, which we are distracting from developing basically electric cars where we need them from. So that is the complete nonsense that we are currently doing, having an intermediate step between forbidding combustion engine cars in 2035 and somewhere in between increasing the demand towards exhaust norms on combustion engine cars, which is a complete waste of resources and manpower, but nevertheless we want to do it. So far it's not decided, but that is things that you shouldn't do to promote sustainability in, let's say, in Europe and in the European Union.
Thank you. I think that's a very good concrete example of what should not be done and why. We're running out of time, I'm very conscious of that, so let me just quickly turn back to you, Mr. Pinter, and then we're going to do one sentence goodbye message to our audience about industry. I mean, you can take your pick, whatever you would like to say, and I think that the main thing is maybe to end on some sort of note of hope. What might give you hope? Is it human reason, or is it ingenuity of creativity, or something else? So Mr. Pinter, so currently, as you very well explained, there's a variety of issues with leveling playing ground and pressures on the steel industry, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, when we talk to the real estate sector, which sadly is not represented on this panel, they actually are very interested to hear in terms of what kind of suppliers they could find and how they could drive down their carbon emissions. So what are the kind of opportunities that you see for your own sector's future here in Slovakia and across the region? And what would you like to see happening more going forward, also in the decarbonization discussions in Europe?
Well, you know, the biggest opportunity is the transition itself. Nobody questions that. There is no other way. It's a running process. Probably nobody will stop it, whether it's the green transition or the digital transition. But the devil is in details. And what we are calling for are the enablers to do the transition as we plan to do it and as we need to do it. And let me just maybe a few things on that. What we really need here, and I think it was already mentioned by the speakers, we need markets for green products. This is something which is not really discussed in a way as it should be. We need mechanisms to support creation of those markets, whether it's carbon contracts or de-risking mechanisms. We need to change the public procurement and introduce rules for green public procurement and introduce other market creation mechanisms for green products. From my point of view, if you look, and now the green steel, which is produced in very, very small amounts, through hydrogen currently comes at a significant cost premium compared to the primary way of steel making. It's up to 100%. Compared to the EAF, the electrified way, it's about 40% higher price. My question is, are the European consumers really willing to pay for the products? Or are we going to develop mechanisms to subsidize creation of green products? I'm always, not because there is a gentleman from Tesco, but I was always mentioning it as an example that if you go to a food store, there is bio vegetables, bio fruits available for many years. If this is so okay, if this is so sustainable, why we have other fruits and vegetables still available? Why everything is not bio? And one of the answers is because it's more expensive. So can we afford it? Is the European citizen consumer really ready for this? That is one thing. Another one you mentioned, and nobody needs to elaborate further, we cannot deliver anything unless there is a level playing field. For me, that's the magic thing. So the one sentence we should deliver at the end was delivered already right now, because we believe that without level playing field, we cannot do what we want to do. One of the issues, I believe, Oliver from Volkswagen was already mentioning, you cannot decarbonize industrial processes using electricity which is not green. And you have to have a lot of electricity. Let me just say that in case of our company, we are representing about 4% of overall Slovak consumption of electricity at this moment, 1.6 terawatt a year. Out of which we now it's half and half, but before it was 2/3 we were able to produce by ourselves using gases, waste gases, which are coming from our production, and about 1/3 we were buying. If we electrify, we will need double of the electricity, and the double of the electricity will result in about 60% cut of emissions. This is the way towards 2030. After 2030, we have low emissions, but going down will require to increase the electricity from these levels, not double or 100 times, but 10 times more. When you look at the numbers of the overall EU steel sector, with the completely clean steel making in the same capacity as it is right now, the low carbon electricity from the grid plus the electricity needed for production of green hydrogen will require about 400 terawatt hour of new electricity a year, which is, and we are mentioning that many times, that's a new Germany on the consumption map of Europe. When you look at the prices, when you look at the sustainable supply of electricity right now, when you look, I've seen my friend Peter Dovhun, the CEO of the Slovak transmission company over here, is the infrastructure ready? Do we have really that enormous amounts of electricity? And so on and so on. And last but not least, we are criticized for that, but we cannot deliver without public support. I was mentioning already huge need for CapEx and OpEx related to the investment for the new technologies. There are mechanisms, and I'm very proud that Slovakia is one of those countries, if not the first country in Europe to offer decarbonization funds through the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and also through the, Recovery and Resilience Facility, and also through the Modernization Fund. There are money available through important projects of common European interest, through ETS Innovation Fund, but we have to really create a good mixture which would help us to deliver.
Thank you. I think the better use of EU funding, and I think we've touched upon a lot of different things, which I will not try to all recap, but I think from infrastructure to better regulation that's not necessarily creating a burden, but streamlining and creating a level playing field, and also a variety of very real issues with the European consumer, and actually whether we are ready to absorb the extra cost. So before we give the floor back to our Master of Ceremonies, so if there's one or two sentences from you, Mr. Stenkovic and Mr. Kurz and Mr. Grünberg, just to one sentence that gives you a bit of hope, maybe, if there's any hope.
Usually the same question I receive from our colleagues, from our employees, because they are afraid that there is a black future for chemical industry. And I told them, look guys, we survived COVID, we've been in critical situations since last February. We are for sure mentally, internally stronger than 3-4 years before. And that's good prerequisite for any other shocks that will come tomorrow. And that's hope.
Thank you. Mr. Kurz?
I think it's so valid for every business. Definitely true. I think it's great to have the discussions. It's even, and that's kind of my message, it's even greater to have a very stable and forward-looking business environment in this country. So I think we should be focusing our economic, political decisions towards really sustainability, economic sustainability as well as environmental sustainability. And I'll back it up with one example. We are now talking that there is a heated discussion whether we should be closed on Sundays or shouldn't be closed Sundays in terms of shops in Slovakia. Instead of it, I think we should be having discussion how to promote plant-based food, because when I talk about the future sustainability, it's only through consuming less animal-based proteins and more plant-based food, and through that going to moving to more sustainable diet. Unfortunately, that's the harsh truth. This is unsustainable, how we eat and what we eat going forward. I think we should be at least looking how to put the VAT for plant-based where the animal proteins are, which is 10 percentage points lower, not talking about maybe supporting the consumption of plant-based by putting it almost vice versa. So I think there are loads of discussions which needs to be happening on a political level, and it would be great to have this economic but environmental sustainability at the top of our heads.
Thank you. Mr. Grünberg?
Yeah, what is giving me hope is that not a single sentence and not a single speaker has questioned the concept of sustainability at all. So basically this discussion would have probably looked different 5 to 10 years ago. Basically that we are not questioning the if, but just looking for the how. That is basically giving me hope that things might happen. The question is, and that is basically the clouds at the sky, is are we quick enough compared to other players on the global markets? And we need to be very agile and very quick now to not discuss too much, but just to simply execute.
Thank you. We will end on that note because we have badly overrun, so I apologize about that. And I'll give the word back to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Linda Zelina. We didn't have a time really for further discussions, all the questions. I probably think you have a lot of questions to this great panel, but thank you very much for heading it, and also to our participants to come up here and discuss these important issues. Before, yeah, it seemed a little bit like sad, the whole discussion, and okay, we are here, we are prepared for the future, we are thinking about the risks and challenges. And then I was thinking, okay, that's the perfect thing to say, that it's one thing for sure that will make our mood much better is food, because the lunch break is coming. But then Mr. Kurz said about the sustainable eating and the plant-based food. And then I realized that I'm not really sure if everything outside prepared for you for the lunch will be plant-based. So if there is some meat, excuse us. Anyway, thank you very much for being here, for discussing this important subject. I think we should stay here and discuss maybe for 2 more hours, and still we will not finish early. But we have another panels prepared, and now is really the time to have a lunch break. So thank you very much for your attention. We will be back here in about an hour. It should be around 1 o'clock, but I know we are running late, so maybe a few minutes later. Thank you very much to our participants, and enjoy your lunch.